Okay, so you know how we're always doing that thing? Like every single moment that we're awake,
Mm.
seeing, we just kind of take it for granted.
Totally. It's wild, right? Visual experience is this incredible source of pleasure, of knowledge, and like this connection to everything around us. But it's so basic to like how we function that we never really like stop and think about it.
And that's exactly why we're taking this deep dive into John Searle's Seeing Things as They Are. We want to figure out how this whole seeing thing, actually works. We're going to try to do it without getting too bogged down in all the philosophy jargon, though.
Exactly. Think of this deep dive as a shortcut to understanding how your own visual experiences connect to the world, how your brain constructs what you see from sensory information.
Okay, I like it. So John Searle, he's dealing with this big question. How do we perceive reality? What's his main argument?
So Searle, he challenges this assumption that's been around for a long time in philosophy. For ages, a lot of philosophers, they believed that we only directly perceive our internal representations of the world, kind of like mental pictures instead of the actual world itself.
So like instead of seeing a tree, we're seeing a mental representation of a tree, getting some Matrix vibes here.
Yeah, kinda. But Searle, he's against that whole idea. He's all about direct realism. He
Yeah.
says that we directly perceive reality, not just a copy, or a representation of it.
Okay, so direct realism, it's probably closer to how we experience the world, right? Like just intuitively. When I look at a tree, I see a tree, not just a picture of a tree in my head.
hmm
But how does Searle explain that, like back it up?
So he starts by addressing this really common argument against direct realism. It's what he calls get this, the bad argument. I know, right? To illustrate it, try closing your eyes for a sec and put your hand over your forehead. Cover your eyes completely.
Okay, done. It's dark, obviously, but it's not like dot nothingness. I still have this sense of visual space even though there's nothing to see.
Exactly, and that's a key part of his point. Even with your eyes closed, you've still got visual consciousness. Searle calls this the subjective visual field. It's different from the objective visual field, which is, the external world, all those objects you see when your eyes are open.
Okay, so we've got this inner visual experience that's always there, and when we open our eyes, the outside world kind of gets added to it.
You could put it that way. But the main point here is that we're not seeing some kind of picture inside our heads that gets like replaced by real seeing when we open our eyes. We're directly perceiving reality itself in both cases, according to Searle.
Gotcha. So what's so bad about this bad argument against direct realism?
Well, the bad argument claims that because we can have experiences like illusions or hallucinations, we can't be directly perceiving reality. Like, if our senses can be fooled, doesn't that mean what we're seeing is always distorted or filtered in some way?
Yeah, that makes sense. If I see a mirage in the desert, I'm obviously not seeing the world as it really is.
Right, and that's where Searle says the bad argument goes off the rails. It's mixing up being aware of an experience with being aware of the intentional object of that experience.
Okay, wait. Intentional object. That sounds like maybe something I should remember from college philosophy. But I might have slipped through that part.
It's actually simpler than it sounds. Intentionality, it basically means that our mental states are always about something. They have, like, an aboutness.
Okay, so like right now I'm thinking about that mirage we were talking about. So my thought is about that mirage.
Exactly. And Searle, his point is that even when we're experiencing, something like an illusion, our experience is still about something real, something out in the world. It's just the relationship between our experience and the object. It's a little off.
Okay. I think I'm with you. So even if my senses are giving me weird information, like with that mirage, my brain's still trying to connect that experience to something real. It's trying to make sense of it as part of the world.
Exactly. It's not like a mirage is just a random picture floating around in your head. Your experience is still directed to something real, something out there. It has intentionality.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So how does this all connect to the bad argument?
So the bad argument, it's making a mistake, see? It treats illusions like they're only about what's going on in our heads, like our internal sensations, instead of being about something in the world.
Okay, so it's like the bad argument is saying that because we can be tricked by a mirage, that means we can never actually see a real oasis. But Searle is saying, like, hold on. Even seeing a mirage, that's still a way of seeing the world. It's just what we're seeing is a little messed up.
You got it. Searle actually uses this really funny analogy to explain this. He says it's like thinking that every time your dog barks at the door, it's like mentally reciting the philosophical definition of knowledge.
Uh-huh. Yeah, like my dog's standing there thinking, I have a justified true belief that the mailman is at the door.
Right. We're putting way too much complexity into the experience.
Mm.
A dog barks at the door cause it senses something, not because it's having a deep thought about, knowledge. We're kind of doing the same thing with that bad argument. We're making it too complicated by mixing up our awareness of an experience and awareness of what that experience is actually about, the intentional object.
It's kind of nice to let go of that whole idea that, like, we only see sense data. It always felt strange, disconnected from, how it feels to actually experience the world.
A lot of people feel that way about Searle's argument. They find it freeing. It lets us have a much more intuitive understanding of how we experience reality, like a grounded understanding. Yep.
Okay, so if we're not, like, trapped inside our own heads, how do our brains actually connect to the world? How do we go from light hitting our retinas to experiencing that, like, vibrant red of say, a delicious apple?
That's where Searle's idea of presentational intentionality comes in. He says that perception, it's not just about representing the world, like in here, in our minds, it's about presenting it to us directly. The object itself is somehow like present in our experience of it.
Okay, so presentational intentionality. I need you to unpack that one for me.
Okay, so think of it this way.
Yeah.
You can close your eyes and picture an apple in your mind, right?
Sure, I can imagine one right now.
So that is what we might call representational intentionality. You're creating a mental image that, represents an apple, but it's not actually an apple. But when you see a real apple right there in front of you, it's different.
Well, yeah, it's way more vivid, obviously, more real. It's not like I can control all the details like I can when I'm imagining it.
Right. And the important difference here, the difference that Searle points to, is causation. In presentational intentionality, you experience the object, like as causing your perception. The light bouncing off of the apple, it hits your eyes and then triggers all this neural activity. And, well, you experience that apple as the source of that experience. It's not just a picture, it's the apple itself being presented to you through your senses.
So it's not just that I see, like, a red shape and I think to myself, oh, yeah, that's an apple. Like, it's based on my memories of apples or whatever. It's more like the apple is, I don't know, sending something to my eyes, making me see it.
That's a great way to put it. Searle would say there's something direct about it, something immediate. It's not just about, matching information to categories we have in our heads, but obviously what we already know does play a part. That's where his concept of the background comes in.
Background. Okay, I'm listening.
So the background, it's this massive, mostly unconscious, I guess, web of knowledge and expectations and experiences. All that stuff shapes how we experience the world. It's all the stuff we bring with us when we open our eyes, so to speak.
So it's like we don't just see a bunch of colors and shapes. We see a tree or a car or a coffee cup because our background gives us the context to understand it.
Exactly. Our brains are constantly interpreting sensory information, and they use what we already know about the world to do it. And everyone's background is unique. It's built from your life, your experiences, your culture, everything that shaped how you understand things. Searle uses a cool example to show this. Think about that Van Gogh painting Starry Night.
Oh, yeah. Those, like, swirling brushstrokes. Definitely not your typical night sky.
Right. And Searle's point is that seeing Starry Night, it can actually change how we see the real night sky. It's not just that we're recognizing a representation of stars. It's that Van Gogh, he's inviting us to look at the real night sky, but to see it as if it was also swirling, full of motion, just like his painting. It's what he calls seeing as. It's not just passively taking it in.
Whoa, that's kind of mind-blowing. Art can change how we see the world.
It can, yeah. It can influence it because it becomes part of our background. And this is about way more than art, too. Think about culture, for example. Research has actually shown that people from different cultures, they even see optical illusions differently.
Wow, so even though we're all looking at the same world, our own unique backgrounds, they mean we might not be seeing it the same way at all. That's deep.
It really is. And this brings us to one of Searle's most interesting and kind of head-scratching concepts, what he calls the backward road.
Okay, the backward road. Sounds like we're about to go on a detour straight into, the most abstract philosophy ever.
Don't worry, I'm with you. So the backward road, it's a way of understanding how we experience things like color, how that connects to what's actually out in the world. Searle's point is, instead of asking how our minds represent, the color red, flip the question around. What's going on with redness that makes us experience it the way we do?
So instead of starting in our heads with the experience of red, we should start out in the world with, actual redness.
Exactly. We're tracing the experience back to the source. So Searle would say that the property of redness, it's actually defined by its ability to cause certain visual experiences. He even came up with a word for it. He calls this visual experience, are you ready for it, glog.
Glog. Okay, come on now, you're messing with me.
Haha. I promise, it's a real philosophical term. Well, at least for Searle it is. Think of it like this. Something is red because, well, it causes the experience of glog for any creature that has a visual system that's kind of like ours.
So it's not just that we all decided to call certain wavelengths of light red. It's that there's something about redness itself that's making our brains have this specific experience.
That's the heart of the backward road, is how we ground those subjective experiences in the objective world. There's just something about redness that causes that glog experience in beings like us.
Okay, this might be a weird question, but like, if we could somehow swap how we
Mm.
experience color, you know, like if my glog experience, suddenly that's how I experience the color green, would a red apple still actually be red?
That's the big question, isn't it? It gets at the core of what Searle's talking about. He's not saying that color is just like totally made up, like we just randomly decided. It's about the relationship between, our human perception, how we all perceive things, and the properties of the actual objects, like out in the world. So if our glog experience all of a sudden it shifted to green wavelengths, yeah, red would basically become green for us. It makes you wonder how much of color is like really out there versus how much our brains are making.
Yeah, it really does. Okay, my brain needs a break.
Yeah.
But thinking about, subjective experience versus objective reality, it makes me think about that brain-in-the-vat thought experiment.
Oh, yeah, classic. That idea that our brains could just be floating in vats, hooked up to computers, being fed a fake reality. Such a good one to think about these questions of perception.
Right. How could we ever really know if our experiences are real? What if it's all just like a really good simulation?
Exactly. And Searle uses the brain in a vat thing to show how important consciousness is. He says that even if we were being tricked by some supercomputer or whatever, our experiences would still be real.
So even if I'm enjoying a delicious steak, it could just be like ones and zeros in some virtual reality. But the experience, tasting it, enjoying it, that's still real. At least for me, it is.
Exactly. And that connects to like a lot of our anxieties today, about technology and stuff. How much of our lives are online? How can we be sure we're not in some kind of information vat? Searle's saying even if we are, our consciousness, our experience, it still matters.
Huh. That is actually kind of comforting
Yeah.
in a weird way. Even if I'm a brain in a vat, I can at least enjoy my,
Yeah.
stimulated latte.
Uh-huh, exactly. But really, Searle's work, it gives us this really cool way to understand something we usually just don't even think about. Seeing. It's not
hmm
just like passively taking in information, it's this active process. Our brains, our experiences, all of it makes it happen.
Absolutely. This deep dive has really opened my eyes. No pun intended.
Yeah.
So any final thoughts for our listeners? What's one thing you hope they'll remember about John Searle's work?
If I had to pick just one, I think it would be this. The next time you're, looking at something, anything, really take a second to think about how amazing that is. Your brain is building a world for you, using sensory information, your memories, even your culture. It's like this dialogue between, the world and your mind. And that, well, I think that's pretty awesome.
Beautifully said. Great reminder to slow down and appreciate that everyday magic. Thanks for taking us on this deep dive today.
It's always fun to get into these, really thought-provoking ideas. And to everyone listening, if you're interested in this stuff, definitely check out John Searle's Seeing Things as They Are. Keep exploring this stuff.